None of us really know how dreadful it is to be living in one of the many German-occupied concentration camps. Fortunately for us, we have the opportunity to read first-hand accounts of people who lived during these horrific times. Tadeusz Borowski is one of the greatest Polish authors of his time. Borowski wrote countless short stories about the Holocaust and death camps. One of his writings is This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, which is a collection of short stories about day-to-day lifestyle in Auschwitz. This short story shows the pure brutality of German forces and how they had total disregard for their prisoners' well-being. The idea of forced labor did not come into mind until the winter of 1933. The Germans used enemies of state in order to meet labor shortages. By the end of the year, many German citizens had to perform labor tasks for various government agencies. However, in the spring of 1942, the idea of forced labor quickly escalated due to the establishment of the first German concentration camp. In the fall of 1944, the war raged on in Europe, and approximately 8 million forced laborers were in Germany's control. The Germans began to rely on these laborers in order to promote the German economy. These workers were used for agriculture, construction, and munitions manufacturing. Many of these workers were civilians, prisoners of war, especially those from the Soviet Union, and lastly, concentration camp inmates, including both Jews and political prisoners. The Germans were able to transport thousands of Jews in cattle carts for hundreds of miles all throughout Europe. Many of these prisoners did not make the long rail rides to the camp due to malnutrition, unsanitary conditions, and being trampled to death. However, for the few that did make it, soon wished they hadn't once they had arrived at the gates of Auschwitz. Much of the work done in the camps and throughout the German nation was done through labor gangs or commandos. In the opening chapter of This Way for the Gas, Ladies and Gentlemen, it describes a typical day for a Canada man in Auschwitz. The Canada men are a labor group that deals with unloading the incoming prisoners. The opening chapter in the book truly shows how cruel and brutal the prisoners had it. They had to do whatever it took to survive. In doing so, the members of the labor groups constantly found moral compromises they had to endure. This is mainly because of them being constantly surrounded by death. The most beneficial labor group in the camp were the Canadian men. This is because SS officers allowed the workers to take food and certain belongings from the Jews that arrived in the cattle cars. The workers mainly took food from the incoming Jews since that was something that was very scarce in the camps. Their jobs were to unload thousands of Jews and make piles of their possessions, which include luggage, blankets, coats, food, and money, which would be sent back to Berlin. In the process of unloading the Jewish prisoners, the commandos had to divide the prisoners into two lines. The left line had women, children, and elders who will face death instantly. The line to the right are full of healthy men who will die within the camp due to starvation and overworking in labor groups. While holding this position of the Canada man, it is never ending. Members of this labor group have to deal with sending these people to their deaths. The laborers see a van with the Red Cross on it, and they know these innocent men and women will soon die in the gas chambers. This really shows how drastic the camp can change someone's normal feelings of humanity just by completely disregarding taking someone's life in order to survive. After the train carts are cleared, the workers must go inside and clean them out again. These workers often see terrifying scenes of dead, trampled babies and dead bodies scattered throughout the carts. Once they're able to clear the cattle carts, another group of cars are ready to be unloaded. This method is like clockwork for the German officers and is continuous day in and day out, which is why they are responsible for killing roughly 4 million Jews at Auschwitz alone. The Germans used the term final solution to refer to their plan of complete annihilation of the Jewish people. Those that couldn't physically work were either shot or put in the gas chambers. And for those that were able to work, the Germans used the policy of annihilation through work, in which certain groups of prisoners were worked to death. Camp prisoners were forced to work under conditions that would directly and deliberately lead to illness, injury, and death. For example, at the Mauthausen concentration camp, emancipated prisoners were forced to run up 186 steps out of a stone quarry while carrying heavy boulders. The population in Auschwitz very frequently gets cut down because of prisoners not being useful to work. Those who get picked for the selection end up going to the gas chambers. However, it wasn't the German officers who dealt with the remains of the selection. Just like everything else in the camp, the prisoners had to deal with burnt bones from the crematoria. Though that showed the grand scale of how brutal and inhumane the situations were for the prisoners at these concentration camps. These prisoners are stripped of all feelings of courage and dignity. They endure so much that the only thing they have on their mind is being able to provide for oneself. The mental and emotional damage of these experiences are unrelatable. Borowski makes a profound comparison in his book. He compares the new monstrous civilization, which is Germany, to the great wonders of the world. Since the prisoners in the labor camps work against their will, they're basically slaves. In doing so, the German nation is building a civilization off of slave labor, much like the Great Pyramids and the Greek architectures. The story is able to show how building civilizations and huge community projects, while may be beneficial to one group, can drastically affect another. Unlike other stories about the Holocaust, Borowski is able to give a detailed first-hand account of the harshness of the concentration camps because he lived through it. After reading through his detailed accounts, we were able to see how brutal and harsh the living conditions and the daily activities were for these prisoners. In doing so, we were able to see how dehumanizing people can get when they are forced with the option of death or survival.